The alien sky burned in shades of violet and red. The twin suns hung low, and the smoke of 1,000 battles drifted like ghosts across the valley. Princess Liara stood upon the rise, her silver armor shining faintly even through the ash. Behind her stretched the remnants of her once mighty army, warriors from the royal worlds, banners torn and blackened by war. They had sworn their lives to her when the rebellion began. They had followed her through storms, deserts, and across the orbit of 3 moons. Yet now, as silence spread through the ranks, she felt the shift in their hearts. The glances no longer held faith. They held fear. The human, Commander Ryan Hale, noticed it first. He had fought beside alien soldiers before, but never had he seen loyalty fade so quickly. His instincts told him something terrible was coming. Liara turned to him. "They will not run," she said quietly, as if to convince herself. "They would never." Ryan looked at her, tall, proud, and shining like a star amid the ruin. "You're their princess," he said, his voice calm but heavy. "But even loyalty bends when it fears death." She met his gaze. "And you, human, why have you not left? This is not your war." Ryan's answer came without hesitation. "Because I gave you my word." The wind picked up, carrying the sound of distant thunder, not from the sky but from engines. The enemy's machines were drawing near, massive walkers that could level mountains. Liara raised her spear, ready to rally what forces she still commanded. But the silence behind her deepened, a murmur spread, then a shout. One of her generals, old scarred, once loyal, stepped forward, his weapon pointed not at the horizon but at her. "You led us into ruin," he cried. "Our brothers are dead because of you." Liara froze. "General Terran, put down your blade." But Terran's voice shook with anger. "You promised victory, yet all you brought us is death. You are no longer our princess." Dozens of soldiers shifted. The sound of metal boots scraping on stone filled the air. Ryan's hand moved to his rifle. Liara took a step forward. "Every death was mine to bear," she said softly. "Every wound, every loss, they weigh upon me. But betrayal will not save our world." Her words met silence. The army that had sworn eternal faith now looked away. Then the first bow was drawn. The shimmer of light from 100 energy strings filled the valley. Ryan's blood went cold. He saw the aim, all fixed on Liara. Time seemed to slow. The hiss of arrows charged with plasma filled the air. Without thought, Ryan moved. He sprinted down the rise, armor clattering, dust flying under his boots. Liara turned just in time to see him leap between her and the line of fire. The sky flashed. A storm of burning arrows tore through the air and struck his armor with thunderous impact. The blast sent sparks and smoke around him. He staggered but did not fall. His chest plate glowed red with heat. The smell of scorched metal filled the air. Liara screamed his name, but her voice drowned beneath the roar. Ryan held his ground. "Stay behind me," he shouted. His body became a wall between her and her betrayers. Every impact drove him backward, but he stood firm. The alien soldiers paused, stunned. None had expected the human to move, to throw himself into certain death for someone not of his kind. Even Terran's hand trembled. Ryan turned his head slightly, blood running down his cheek. "You're not dying today," he said to Liara through clenched teeth. The second volley never came. The army froze, trapped between shame and confusion. They had seen courage, real courage, and it broke whatever rage remained. Liara rushed forward, catching Ryan as his knees buckled. Arrows protruded from his armor, glowing faintly. "You fool," she whispered, tears streaking her dust-covered face. "You should have run," he smiled weakly. "Couldn't let them hit royalty. Bad for diplomacy." Even wounded, his humor flickered. It made her chest ache. Behind them, the rebels began to scatter. Some threw down their weapons. Others simply vanished into the haze. The sound of engines in the distance grew louder, enemy walkers closing fast. Ryan looked up at her. "We need to move." Liara nodded, wrapping his arm over her shoulder. Step by step, she helped him down the ridge, every breath of his heavy with pain. The sun sank lower, painting the mountains in firelight. They reached the ruins of an ancient citadel half buried in sand. Its stone arches were cracked, its symbols faded, but it offered cover. She eased him onto the cold ground. Ryan's face was pale, his eyes half closed. "You need to rally them," he muttered. "Your army still needs you." She shook her head. "No, they betrayed me." "They can be reminded," he said weakly. "You just have to show them what loyalty looks like." Liara stared at the man before her, a being from a distant small planet no one in her empire had ever respected. Yet he had bled for her, shielded her with his own body, and still spoke of hope. She pressed her hand over one of his wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. "You should rest." "I can't rest," he whispered. "Not while you're still a target." Outside, the sound of battle still rumbled far away. She looked up through the shattered ceiling at the twin suns, now half set. The light turned gold on Ryan's armor, gleaming through the smoke like the last spark of a dying fire. Liara sat beside him, silent for a long moment. She had been born to rule, taught that courage was command, that mercy was weakness. But what she saw in him was something else. He had no throne, no empire, no army, and yet he had stood against 100 weapons without fear. She felt something break open inside her. When Ryan finally drifted into unconsciousness, she rose and walked to the entrance of the citadel. Her armor caught the faint starlight. From that place she could see the valley below, and the movement of her scattered troops returning. They came hesitantly, drawn by guilt, by confusion, by the strange sight of their princess alive when she should have been dead. Liara stood on the broken steps and raised her voice. "You fired on your ruler," she said, the echo carrying through the ruins. "But I will not return your hate. I will show you what loyalty means." She turned slightly, pointing to where Ryan lay inside the shadows. "That human had no reason to fight for me. Yet he did. He bled when you ran. He protected your princess when you betrayed her. That is what honor looks like." The soldiers lowered their eyes. Some began to weep quietly. Liara's voice softened. "If one man from a small blue world can stand for what is right, then so can you." A wind swept through the valley, scattering the banners of rebellion like dust. Inside, Ryan stirred, whispering her name, though she did not hear it. She was already walking down the steps, her spear raised high once more. The faint light of the suns caught the edges of her armor as she shouted to her army, not as a princess commanding obedience, but as a leader calling for redemption. The soldiers fell to their knees one after another, until the entire valley bowed. And for the first time since the war began, Liara felt no fear. The human had given her something stronger than armor or armies. He had given her faith. As night came and the stars filled the alien sky, she looked back at the citadel where Ryan lay resting. She whispered softly, "You will live. You must." Outside, the distant thunder of approaching enemy forces rolled once more. She turned toward the sound, her eyes shining with a new kind of fire. The princess would not flee. Not now. Not ever. And in the shadows behind her, the human who had shielded her heart still breathed. The spark that would soon ignite the courage of a whole world. The suns rose slowly over the battlefield, lighting the ruins of the citadel with soft gold. Smoke still drifted through the broken walls. Princess Liara sat beside the human soldier who had saved her life. His armor was cracked and dark with dried blood, his breathing weak but steady. Ryan's face looked peaceful, but his skin was cold. Liara had wrapped him in her cloak during the night, praying that he would wake. She had spoken to him softly, as if her voice alone could keep him alive. Now, in the still morning, she heard footsteps outside the ruins. She rose at once, her weapon ready. But it was not the enemy, it was her own people. The soldiers who had betrayed her the day before now walked with heads bowed, their weapons lowered. At their front came General Taran, the same man who had led the rebellion. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "My princess," he said, kneeling on one knee, "we saw the humans stand before death to protect you. We saw something we had forgotten, honor. Forgive us and let us serve again." Liara looked down at him, her face calm but her eyes full of sorrow. "You betrayed me," she said quietly. "But you did not only betray your princess, you betrayed yourselves. Still, I will not waste this chance to make things right." Taran lowered his head even more. "Command us," he said. "We will fight to the end." Liara turned toward the ruins where Ryan lay. "Then help me save him first," she said. "Without him, none of this matters." The soldiers obeyed without question. They built fires for warmth, brought what medicine they could find, and stripped power cells from broken machines to create energy for healing tools. The alien healers worked through the morning and into the night, their hands glowing faintly with blue light as they tried to close the deep wounds on the human's body. Liara did not leave his side. She sat beside him, her fingers brushing against the back of his hand every few moments as if reminding him he was not alone. When darkness came again, She stayed awake. The healers whispered that he might not survive the night. She listened in silence, her heart heavy. Hours passed. Outside, the wind sang through the ruins, carrying the smell of metal and dust. Then near midnight she heard a faint sound. Liara. Her head snapped up. His eyes were open, weak but alive. She leaned close at once. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice shaking with relief. Ryan tried to sit up, but pain stopped him. "How long? Was I out?" "2 days," she said softly. "You nearly died," he smiled faintly. "I always wanted to see what dying for royalty feels like." She frowned at his weak joke, but her eyes glistened. "Don't say that again." He turned his head, looking at the soldiers who stood outside the ruins, working under torchlight. "They're still here?" "Yes," she said. "They returned. They saw what you did." Ryan's voice was barely a whisper. "Then you've already won?" Liara looked down at him, her throat tight. "We have not won anything yet. The enemy still marches," he nodded slowly. "Then we finish it." The next morning, when the suns rose again, Ryan was still too weak to stand. But Liara refused to leave him behind. She called her army together in the valley below the citadel. Thousands of faces turned toward her, tired, ashamed, but ready. She climbed onto the highest stone and raised her voice so that all could hear. "Yesterday, you turned your weapons against me," she said, her voice strong. "But today you will raise them for something greater. You saw a man from another world stand for what was right. He had no throne, no army, no promise of reward, and only courage. And that courage showed me the truth." She pointed to the horizon where dark shapes moved. The enemy's war machines marching through the dust. "That is what stands against us now. Fear, cruelty, and control. But we will not run. Not this time. Not after one human showed us what loyalty means." The soldiers shouted in reply, voices echoing through the valley. They lifted their weapons, their banners, and their faith. Ryan watched from the ruins as she led them, her silver armor catching the sunlight. For the first time since he had come to this world, he saw her not as a ruler but as a leader, one who could make even the broken stand tall again. The enemy army arrived by noon. Massive walkers moved like towers of metal, their weapons glowing red. The ground shook with every step. Liara stood at the front line, spear in hand, eyes fixed on the advancing force. Behind her, her army waited. Ryan struggled to rise. His armor was patched, his wounds still fresh, but he refused to stay behind. With help from one of the alien soldiers, he pulled himself up and walked out into the open. When Liara turned and saw him, her breath caught. "You should be resting," she said. He smiled faintly. "I told you. I gave you my word." The soldiers around them looked at him with awe. The sight of a wounded man still walking to fight beside their princess filled them with something they had not felt in years. Hope. The battle began with a sound like thunder. Energy blasts tore through the air. Liara led the first charge, her spear flashing bright as lightning. Ryan followed close behind, using his rifle to cover her flank. They fought as one, human and alien, side by side. Every time Liara struck, Ryan covered her from behind. Every time Ryan stumbled, she turned and defended him. Their movements became one rhythm, trust and survival. Hours passed. The enemy's numbers were vast, but the courage of the army was stronger. They fought like people who had been given back their souls. When the largest of the enemy walkers reached the center of the valley, Ryan looked up at it. It was a tower of death, weapons ready to fire. He knew that if it shot once, everything would end. He looked at Liara. She met his eyes and understood without words. He moved toward the machine, staggering but determined. "Cover me!" he shouted. She shouted after him, "Ryan, no!" But he was already running. He reached the fallen wreck of an old fighter, ripped open a damaged power cell, and dragged it toward the walker. Sparks flew as he connected the wires, setting a charge. The walker turned its massive cannon toward him. For a moment it seemed certain he would be destroyed. Then Liara's voice cut through the air. "Now!" she shouted, leading her army in a final strike. Ryan slammed his hand on the detonator. A burst of light swallowed the field. The walker exploded, collapsing like a mountain of fire and smoke. The enemy army broke at once, their lines scattering into the desert. Silence fell. Only the sound of wind remained. Liara ran to where Ryan had fallen. He was alive, though barely. The explosion had thrown him into the dust, his armor glowing faintly. She dropped to her knees beside him, tears falling freely. "You fool," she whispered again. "You saved us all." He smiled faintly through the pain. "Told you. Diplomacy." She laughed softly, a sound full of both grief and relief. Around them, her soldiers knelt, their banners rising in the wind. When the battle ended, the princess ordered her people to honor the human who had saved them. His name spread across the empire, not as a soldier but as the symbol of loyalty and courage. Weeks later, when Ryan finally recovered enough to stand, Liara walked beside him through the rebuilt citadel. The sky above them was clear for the first time in years. She turned to him and said quietly, "You could return to Earth now. Your world is safe." He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "I think I'll stay. Someone has to make sure you don't jump in front of arrows next time." Liara's eyes softened. "And someone has to remind you that you are not alone in this galaxy. Anymore." They stood side by side as the suns set over the horizon, the princess of a distant empire, and the human who had changed it forever. In that moment, neither crown nor rank mattered. Only loyalty, friendship, and the quiet bond that had turned betrayal into hope. And across the stars, stories began to spread of the day when one human stood before 100 arrows and taught an empire what it truly meant to be brave.